All right, guys, we're back.
We are back indeed. That's right.
And listen, we want to kick off this next year talking about why there's hope, daggone it.
That's right. Yeah, we're going to try to start off 2021 with this podcast with a little bit of exploration. We're going to talk about, obviously 2020 was tremendously challenging, and it's important for us to recognize that, and we will. But we're also going to talk about why we should have hope going into 2021. And we're going to talk about some ways in which we can all position ourselves potentially for flourishing a little bit more this coming year.
Yeah. And so we also want to say thanks for sticking with us through this break. Obviously, we as a group of two numbskulls trying to make the world a better place had some challenges here with 2020.
Yeah, the understatement of the century. Obviously, and we'll talk about this a little bit more briefly today, but I'm sure we'll delve into it more in future episodes. But it was incredibly challenging. If you haven't listened to our latest episode from 2020 back in November, Chris released a short explanation of what was going on, and my son was killed in an accident, and it was incredibly challenging, and yet we are hanging in there, and we are committed to what we're doing here with the Indigo podcast because we think it's important and it resonates with people all over the globe, and that really means a lot to us. So thank you for sticking with us, and let's start talking about how 2020 was tremendously challenging for so many of us, because it is important at this point of starting 2021 to recognize what we've been through.
Yeah. So people don't come to the Indigo podcast for a bunch of mamby-pamby kumbaya. This isn't, we're not going to release a book about how brownies and hugs will get you to where you need to go in your executive career.
Wait, that's actually a pretty good idea.
That kind of New York selling best trash is not what we do here. That being said, hugs and brownies are great along the way. I had more than a few brownies during 2020. Right. As Ben looks at my chubby cheeks over the video chat. But we are going to stare into the abyss of 2020 and punch it in the eye. All right? And give it a big black one. So first, the pandemic.
Yeah, that's,
my gosh.
Obviously the pandemic was and continues to be the defining story in terms of how it has affected all of our daily lives, right? And, just looking at the data, there's many great organizations that are collecting the data on this. One of my favorites is the Johns Hopkins University has put together a dashboard, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. But, almost 81 million people around the world have contracted the coronavirus. Just under, as of this recording, 1.8 million worldwide deaths, just under 340,000 deaths in the United States. And it has upended many people's lives. People have been directly affected. Certainly, if you had a loved one or a friend who did die, and more of us are starting to have that experience, or if you were simply affected in terms of disruptions to your work, your daily life, education, and many more aspects of how you go about your day.
Yeah, and if you're one of those numbskulls that wants to jackpick these numbers, oh, well, how do we know? Well, listen, we didn't even have enough testing kicking off, so it was most likely a lot more than 81 million globally, right? Yeah. There's countries that don't have the resources for testing or public health facilities and the whole gamut.
And countries that might have unreliable, we'll say, reporting of these statistics even.
Right. So people like to get conspiracy minded on this stuff because it's so big, right? Anytime. So I'm from Nashville before I moved out to Utah. And right, we just recently had a bombing. And that bombing it's just unprecedented. Why? Who was this person? Anytime there's that kind of ambiguity, anytime you don't have the full faculties, and we talk about this in some of our earlier episodes around COVID and sense making and all this kind of stuff, your brain as a survival mechanism goes into creative mode. Now, this is great if you work for Pixar or something. You be creative. Make, children's screams fuel a monster city. I mean, that elevator pitch will get you a movie deal. But we don't need people getting movie deals on COVID-19 nitpicking the numbers.
That's right.
It's a lot, okay? It's a lot. And it's unlikely that Joe Numskull out there has a way to be like, okay, so maybe it's 81.2 million. Maybe it's 79 million. It's hard to keep score on these. Guess what? The pros will say, it's hard to keep score. So we've kind of have these guidelines as a professional scorekeepers for these kinds of things. It doesn't matter the exact piece. The thing is this pandemic is big.
Right.
It is significantly worse than a flu. And just to say that it's just some, it's easy to say it's some educated weenie out there, driving his donut route or whatever. Sorry to donut delivery drivers everywhere, but I don't know. But anyway, somebody out there that's missing it. But I've had senior officers in the military tell me this is no worse than the flu.
Yikes.
And I've had executives of all stripes. Some of these guys have good motivations, right? They're just, I don't think it's that bad, but that's coming from a visceral, emotional response. This is not a disciplined data gathering operation. So Johns Hopkins is a good resource, good data. This was a bad pandemic, and we're not out yet.
That's right. And so we are also posting a link in the show notes to an article from Johns Hopkins, which talks about COVID versus the flu and fairly clearly shows some data that strongly indicates that it is not the flu. It is worse than the flu. More people have died from it. More people get it, and so forth. And so I think we can dispel that myth, and there are many other myths. But I think we can all agree this has been a big deal for all of us in 2020. And if you look at just the flu, for example, the World Health Organization estimates that between 290,000 to 650,000 people die of flu-related causes every year worldwide. And, so take that at the high end, 650,000 from the flu compared with almost 1.8 million from COVID-19. I think they are different. So, health aspects of this have certainly been a significant part of our lives and are an ongoing, unfolding story that we're living through. But we also have the economic impact that has come along with that pandemic. That has been a tremendous part of this entire year as well.
Yeah, and we can't be myopic on these economic impacts. So if you are an executive at Amazon, you're like, oh man, online ordering has never been higher. Mm-hmm. Woo! But if you're somebody whose restaurant lost, half of their seating and they had to lay off half their staff, or they had to close because, they just couldn't make the bills work with that reduced seating and the high rent they have to pay.
Yep.
Then, this is something where certain aspects of the economy just got their rear end handed to them. Yeah. I mean, bad. And there was nothing they could do about it. Viable, good business models flushed based on a pandemic.
Right. And it seems that, certainly the service and hospitality industries, tourism, all of those have been hit extremely hard by this pandemic. And, there's been disruptions in supply chains, and that has certainly caused a lot of problems. It has been a tremendous economic impact to so many people. Now, the research on these types of topics, this is something that is also unfolding. We were talking yesterday when we were preparing for this episode, Chris, about how it will take years for us to fully understand or to start to understand all of the different outcomes of this pandemic on us in various ways, be it from an economic standpoint, be it from an educational standpoint, and so forth, because these are very big, messy issues that take a lot of time to do the research on. So that knowledge will emerge, but I think we can safely say that it has disrupted the economic and financial stability for many, many people.
Yeah, and one of the shortcut thinking ways that I can't really get behind is people compare and they're like, well, look at Germany. Well, look at France. Look at the UK. All of those politicians have different cohorts of people in those countries and different thoughts about, well, like one of the big disruptions we had here, education disruptions, right? So every country, now, if there was one person in control that could get everybody to do what they want, I mean, your planning could look a lot different, right? But we don't have that. We have, gosh, have you ever been to a PTA meeting, Ben?
I haven't, but so my wife is actually she's the treasurer of the PTO at their school, but it's a smaller group where they tend to get things done pretty easily. But you're right that it can be difficult to try to come to consensus is where I think you're driving at, right?
Yeah, because some of the parents thought, well, it's ridiculous for kids to wear masks. They'll never wear masks, or they'll come home with their neighbor, their buddy's mask. Hey, I'll trade you my Superman mask for your Batman mask. And for our international listeners, PTO, PTA, that's a parent teachers
Right.
organization. It's where you sort stuff. But we've all sat in there and you look over at that one parent and you're like, what is this person saying?
Mm-hmm.
And we have that at scale in our country when it comes to what we should do with education. What should we do with the economy and different businesses?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and in the face of ambiguity like this, experimentation is something that is helpful. Like, that's something that we know. And so actually think that it's probably good that we don't have all of these things being trying to, someone at the top trying to sort everything out when you're in extreme ambiguity doesn't really work well. So there have been various experiments that have gone on throughout our country, different school districts trying different things, and different states, for example, implementing different things to try to learn from it. Now, it's been a mess, right? It's a messy, messy process. It does seem like the schools are not the super spreaders that we feared that they might be, so that is a good thing. But in terms of just the disruption, kids learning at home, I watched my kindergartner, for example, try to do some stuff from home, and the school was doing their best, and they did a good job as best as they could be expected to do. But for a little kid, it is very difficult to stay engaged. I mean, it's hard to stay engaged on those things when you're an adult, so as a kid, very very tricky. You can only imagine the tricky nature of trying to learn that way if you don't have, for example, awesome internet and a bunch of devices in your house for your kids to learn on. So I think that there certainly has been a disruption in education. That'll be another thing that I think that the education researchers will be looking at for a number of years and seeing how 2020 and beyond have influenced the learning outcomes for kids. And my guess is that they may find some things. The kids are resilient and can certainly catch up, but it has been hard for people. And this has been especially hard, I think, for a lot of folks who, their kids normally were at school, and so that was kind of daycare. But then it's like, oh no, your kid is now virtually learning, and maybe you're still working. How do you figure that out? So that has a certain negative impact, certainly, on people's ability to function in their own professional lives.
Now, I'm totally with you on the experimentation, Ben. The thing that needs to happen, though, is we need to be honest about, hey, listen, I'm going to try this, you try that. Let's compare notes in a minute, rather
Right.
than darn you and you're wrong not doing my way.
No, you're
That's not
absolutely right.
experimentation. And there is some stuff that can be done at the top, like
Yeah.
wearing a mask. Here's the science on wearing a mask. Everyone that can wear a mask should wear a mask.
Hmm.
Those kinds of things. And with the kids stuff alone, we talked about how, hey, if you're at Amazon, it's great. You're full employment right now. But if you're Joe restaurant owner, you could be struggling really bad. Not everybody has kids. And then certain people are in jobs, like to your point, where they just have to go to work,
Hmm.
right? And a lot of these things got, unfortunately, how we slice the cake or view these. This lens was a politically partisan one.
That's right. And I think that's another piece of 2020 that has been tremendously challenging and negative is that this threat, of a pandemic should have been, or maybe even could have been, something that unified people and brought people together to try to find some common solutions or at least some ways to approach the issue. Because if we look at, for example, the research on groups, when you have a group or a team that faces an external threat, it oftentimes can bring the group together. Now, that's a little bit different when you're talking about entire countries and so forth, but it really turned out to not be that way, at least in the United States. It turned out to be something where everything from wearing a mask or not to which expert do you listen to or not became politicized. And it just really, really was a bummer.
Yeah, this this is just rife with the human condition because, first of all, any expert's going to say, if you say, do you 100% know this about masks? Well, no, we don't. Matter of fact, gravity, guys, is a theory. And, gravity doesn't always work. That was part of the theory of relativity. It breaks down at large mass and high velocities. So, but you don't go outside your front door being like, oh my gosh, I'm going to float away today. Right. And so, but people will drive a wedge between these areas of not 100% uncertainty. And we're not even certain about gravity to the full extent, right?
Well, and people also have been, they'll throw rocks, for example, metaphorically, at Anthony Fauci, right? So in the United States, he is certainly recognized as an expert in these areas. He's the director of the National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Diseases, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. And, they were throwing stones at him saying, well, the beginning of the pandemic, he was saying that masks weren't something that was helpful. And then he changed his mind. And yeah, over time, you learn things and you adapt. That's kind of how science and expertise works. So when you want and expect 100% certainty and someone to never change their mind, that's crazy.
And I'll take it one worse. I'll throw a bone to the numbskulls that want to throw a rock at Fauci. That he's even admitted lately in New York Times articles that where, I kind of knew this wasn't the case, but I, went with my gut at the time. And some of this is just public health messaging. Now, Senator Mark Rubio, and I think maybe even Ted Cruz said, look, he doesn't believe that we can decide for ourselves. Well, anyone in public health messaging, one of the things is, hey, tentative data shows that we might only need to have 60 to 70% or some odd people vaccinated to get to a herd immunity number. But my experience shows me that will revise itself upwards as we get more data. Mm-hmm. Now, what do you say at that point as a public health? Do you go with what you know right now? And then what if it doesn't go up in the future? Are you considered a fearmonger? A lot of these public health messaging, any kind of governmental bend, you've had to do some PR in the Navy, I'm sure at some point where you have to speak to the public a little bit. You try to go forward, but every time you're talking, you're thinking about, well, this could happen with it. But that kind of milky toast message doesn't sell to the public. You have to be decisive at that moment. And the fact that, well, he knew it was going to go up and he just didn't quite communicate it at the time. Well, that's a pro call. That's not a, look, I got you.
Right. So I think that's another part of 2020 that's just been really challenging is the partisan nature with which all of this was handled. And then, another thing that kind of came right in the middle of the year in the United States were many issues surrounding racial unrest that brought, I think, some good attention to certain issues. And, I think that can be a place for moving forward, but it certainly was challenging for many people. And, I think others would also say that, yeah, it's been challenging for a very, very long time. Now you all know about it a little bit more. So, again, challenging year for so many people.
Yeah, we don't get to pick when disasters happen. Life is what happens when you're making plans. And, for the Black Lives Matters movement and stuff to, oh, well, gee, if it just happened during a non-pandemic year, we could really get that. It's not like problems in life that we have to deal with line themselves up in priority order so we can deal with them one at a time. Yeah. And that's short-sighted thinking anyway, because we're resilient, we're capable, we're a society, we got teams of teams of teams. We can deal with more than one problem at a time.
That's right. And so, of course, along with this, and this is something we've addressed many times during the past year in this podcast, is social isolation. And, for people like you, Chris, that's a problem, I think, right?
I want to cuddle everybody after this. I'm just like, let me hug you. We got the vaccine. It's over. It's like, but wait a minute. I don't even get that kind of release because once we get the vaccine, there's like all this phased-in approach. We don't know if the vaccine prevents you from spreading it. The thing is, the way we get our social supports, the things by which we build our lives around. For some people, it's sports. They like to get together. Some people have a local bowling league,
Hmm.
a book club, places of worship, and these kinds of things. These are the things that everybody, based on who they are as a person and their needs for community versus, some people are introverts and need more alone time. It doesn't matter. Everybody builds their life in that community, and something like the pandemic and everything that's gone on this year disrupts those social supports.
Right. Yeah, I have not personally really missed hugging people. It was funny. I was telling my wife this. I was like, I'll be kind of glad if we don't go back to like the huggy huggy kissy kissy thing. When you're meeting relatives and people like that. But that's
Did
just
you
me,
have
right?
like a weird aunt or something that ruined you?
No, no, I don't think so. It wasn't that. It's I don't know. I'm slightly more introverted than you, I think, Chris. But so that's been a challenge for many people. And even for me, I'm like, goodness sakes, it would be great to be able to get together more. It would be, celebrating the holidays, trying to do those types of things is really challenging. And then, so many of us have had personal challenges on top of all of this other gunk that was 2020. Certainly, people have had relatives and friends who have died from COVID. They have had people who have gotten sick from COVID. They have had people who have gotten sick and maybe even passed away from other things, right? I certainly, as all of you know, if you've listened and paid attention, had a tremendous challenge thrown at me in early November when my son was riding his bike and was hit by a car and he died. That has been tremendously challenging, as you can probably only imagine, unless it's happened to you. And it's something that, I am currently still dealing with and will be dealing with probably in an acute manner for the next 2 to 3 years and in other ways for the rest of my life. It will never be something that will go away. So that has been certainly a huge challenge. And coming in the middle of COVID, trying to set up a funeral while thinking we don't want this to be a super spreader event. Fortunately, the church that we go to is fairly large physically, so they were able to we could plan it out, and we have a limited attendance at the funeral, and we were able to do things in a safe way. But it was really tricky, and so dealing with all of that, health challenges with parents who are growing older, all of those issues combined have made 2020 by far the worst year in my life thus far. There have been bright spots, there have been good things that have happened, but it has been very challenging.
Yeah. I was at the funeral, and that definitely, it's not even my child, but that was the saddest day I've had. And, the internet's full of all those memes. 2020 can, some version of 2020 can go jump in the lake.
Yeah.
But let's talk about, now that we've looked into the face of the bear, let's punch it in the mouth, right? Let's talk about why we should have hope
Please.
going into 2021.
Yeah.
Now, so just a quick recap: pandemic, massive political polarization that's coming to head like a bad pimple. Black Lives Matter. I mean, there's just everything stacked, all of our political dysfunction and gridlock and all of that stuff. All right, so we got it all out there. This is the chessboard of shenanigans we had this past year. But Ben, when we started this episode prepping yesterday, it was like, man, what should we do an episode on as a kind of, we're coming back? And we were both like, there's so much hope to have.
There is hope. There is always hope. And I think there are some specific reasons why we should be hopeful, and we must be hopeful going into 2021. I think, for one thing, coming out of any challenge, any tragedy, you have to have hope. You have to have that hardiness, that sense of purpose and meaning in order to continue moving forward in a productive way psychologically. That is a good thing. It has been incredibly challenging for millions of people around the world this year. It hasn't been a nightmare across the board. It's very difficult to kind of contextualize the pandemic, for example, because there's so many different ways that you can view it personally. You ask the person whose parents had to die alone because of this. I mean, that they're going to certainly have a very unique and valid perspective on the pandemic. Then there are people who maybe got it and had, mild symptoms, and they'll have another perspective. But the global view here is that, this was serious. But many people rose to the challenge. And despite the political bickering, despite the shenanigans, despite the jackwagons and numbskulls that we have encountered throughout this year, we have seen acts of, heroism, acts of bravery. We have seen people be innovative. People have risen to the challenge individually and in groups through this miracle of organization that we can do as humans. And that has given me hope, and it gives me hope going into this next year.
Yeah, this has got to be a rally cry. Okay, the minute you get hit by the storm, all of a sudden on your sailboat, oh shoot, you got to pull down the sails. I mean, you get lost, and this is really bad. But we've taken the hit, guys. We're now decisively engaged in all of this stuff, and it's time for us, right, to pull up our pants and get on with it. And we've seen medical professionals do it while facing the moral injury of this is a hoax and this is baloney, and that they go and, you see the pictures of them with their PPE is just rub their face raw and all that stuff. But you know what? They're getting to work every day. Yeah. And we got to get to work as a society. I am not a person of faith. Ben absolutely is. But for my friends that are people of faith, you got to dig into that faith. Do you really believe that your higher power isn't aware of what's going on? And how can you participate with that? I don't see because I come out of the Christian faith, I think of all those stories where the disciples were like, I don't know, Jesus, this is so bad. And he's like, come on, you jackwagons, let's get rid of it. We got to save the world here. And so not that I'm Jesus, but us at the Indigo Podcast are saying, all right, jackwagons, we can't. And this is the greatest generation thing during World War II.
Right.
Everybody got on with it to make the world a better place. They were facing, legitimate. Everybody likes to call each other Hitler. Their political enemies are all Hitler. But we are not facing Hitler here. The enemies and problems that we have are self-inflicted as a society at large, and it takes everyday leaders. And look at yourself in the mirror. You're that everyday leader. Or I think of that scripture, look at the fields, they're ripe for harvest. And, who's going to go out and harvest the wheat?
That's right.
And it's like, here I am, God, send me. And so even if you're not a person of faith, you look at these problems out there, you need to say, well, who's going to do something about this? Well, I wish somebody in the government would just get on with it, would you? Would somebody come up with a perfect plan that won't cause any polarization, racialization? There's no such thing, guys. You got to step into this messy, sticky, yucky fray and show some gosh darn leadership. The leader is the one who steps up. It's time for everyone to take an at-bat here.
That's right. And, one bright spot that we certainly saw during this past year that just gives me hope in our ability as professionals, as humans, as organizers, as leaders, is the science and research focus that just came to a forefront and came to bear on this problem of the pandemic, right? There's a great article in The Atlantic that we'll post a link to talking about, what a tremendous achievement it has been to develop a vaccine for COVID this quickly. It is on par with, on par perhaps with landing on the moon in terms of the scientific, the harnessing of scientific knowledge and expertise and the speed with which it happened. I believe they had the virus fully sequenced back in January of 2020. They immediately started working on a vaccine, and normally these things take years to do. And it is remarkable. Both my brother and his wife, my sister-in-law, they both recently got the vaccine. They're both healthcare workers. And it's amazing that this is happening so quickly. And I hope that and this is a reason for hope, that it gives us some hope going into 2021 that we will be able to, during the course of this next year, come to get this thing under control.
Yeah, this was a Manhattan Project for disease solutioning, right?
Yeah.
And Did
What
the
was the
science?
Manhattan Project, Chris?
That's where we made the atom bomb, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That
Just
that
for
that
people
whole
who don't
thing.
know, right? That
Oh,
was a major
solve.
harnessing of engineering and scientific expertise that came to bear on the problem of making making new weapons, right?
Well, and this is what's great about it. I want to use this as a prototype for every one of you that are out there, that you guys are leaders. I mean, we hear from you. You're aspiring executives, senior level executives, CEOs. You guys are, most of you are already leaders, but this needs
Yeah.
to be the prototype. Those scientists didn't say, they're like, oh, I don't know. Some of these people think what we're doing is a hoax over here. They didn't give a rip. They're like, hey, we see what's going on. We know what we need to do. And they got their keisters to work.
Mm-hmm.
And they solved it. Now everybody, oh, well, now the vaccine. Well, is the vaccine? They don't even care. So listen, you don't have to worry about everything being perfect and solved, right? You don't have to even worry about the 100% solution. Everyone needs to just get to with their realm of influence and who they know, what they know, and start making things better. Um, just like the guys that came up with the COVID vaccine and got to work. And while they were doing it, people at the Defense Logistics Agency was planning out, hey, we don't even have a vaccine, but we got to be ready to take it by rail, by train, plane, and automobile all over the place to get it done. Oh, we're going to need freezers. So everybody's doing that. Now, are they worried about, well, gee, there's riots in Portland right now? Sure they are as a citizen. But does that stop what they're doing every day? I mean, this is a time that we've got to pick ourselves up and get to work. It's time to get to work, guys.
That's right. And one thing that we saw during this past year, which has been remarkable and I should be inspiring to all of us, are the healthcare workers just showing true devotion to their profession, getting out there and doing their work despite the risks, despite the challenges, figuring things out, and doing what they were trained to do. That is just, to me, really inspiring when you think about, doing your duty and feeling like you have a duty to do something, and taking the reins when you can. I think that's just fantastic. It's a story of humans rising to the challenge and helping other people through a tough time. So I think there's just this resilience that we have seen of humans. We are oftentimes able to do much more than we think we can. When we have something happen to us, speaking both personally of my own situation of the past couple months, speaking also in terms of what we have experienced collectively during the past year, we have made some huge changes in, for example, education, how we deliver education, how we do our business, how we go about our work lives. And we are able to change when we need to. And that is a lesson that we need to remember so that we can face adversity in the future in a similar way.
Yeah. So outside, leaving some of the pandemic stuff behind, right? Because we've kind of beat that horse, but
Boo, pandemic.
boo, pandemic. That's right. But organizations immediately had to adapt. We were talking to people who said, if we wanted to bring all our workforce home to work from home, it would have taken us like 2.5 years and millions and millions and millions of dollars and a lot of consultants and blah, 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 blah. We did it in a week and a half, and like no money. And there's some executive going like, why can't we harness this regular? Well, like when we talk with our friend Mike Richardson, right? A lot of the creativity that you want to maintain in your organization is to do the work of triage without the emergency.
Yeah. Well, doing the work of the crisis without the crisis,
Right.
right?
That's what he says. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the idea is it was proven that we could adapt in ways that we always thought were impossible. So when people say, well, people are too polarized, it's impossible. Man, shut up. Shut up. That is stinking thinking. They said we couldn't go to the moon, and then we did. Right? The human would never have a powered flight, and we did. And so we just haven't gotten there yet. And that's the challenge of life, is we got to live in the now and the not yet. And we do that by getting to work and trying to be more creative. One of the phrases that I like to use that comes from the design thinking out of the agile world is, how might we? So rather than we can't, how might we get along better here? How might our organization better support those people with children and not good child care support?
Mm-hmm.
These kinds of things. And that's one of the things that we've been blown away with that we hear from former clients and other professionals who know is just how rapid the organizational innovation was during this time.
Right. If they would have tried to plan out, bringing everybody home, for example, to work remotely, it would have taken, a year or so to make that plan and get those policies and those procedures in place. And, this happens and they're like, well, I guess we're going to do this in a week. And it happens. Right. And it's just amazing to see that. So I think there is a lot of hope. I am renewed in my hope and my inspiration for the human ability to do great things when we work together, and our ability to organize is truly fantastic. So, Chris, specifically for you, what are some things that you're hopeful about going into this next year?
Well, I'm hopeful that a new pragmatism can emerge. There's been a lot of this either or thinking, black and white thinking. But, a lot of the ways that we change, we talked about, oh man, organizations really developed and evolved and they did all this stuff. Some of the ways they did that were horrible. This was the worst idea to how to change your workforce during a pandemic. Now, does anybody go into those decisions thinking, gee, how can I really screw up my organization right now? No. And, some of that stuff derails, and there's still the garbage, self-seeking, self-promoting behaviors that you'll see in human beings anywhere, right? That's not just executives that do that. That's every level. I'm hopeful that a new pragmatism arises to where we can say, listen, we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're still going to, however, acknowledge that there's issues and problems with the ways that we make decisions, and we're just going to keep improving because that's what we do, right? And there are some ideas that are just flat out false. There's some ideas that are 100% correct, like the earth is round. And there's some ideas that are some blend. And I think I'm hopeful for a pragmatism to emerge where we can start to view and have better solving abilities as organizations, not just as individuals, but as organizations. What about
That's
you,
great.
Ben? What are you hopeful for 2021?
Well, I'm hopeful for many things. I think I have, your point about pragmatism and trying to work together and solve problems and so forth. I think that certainly resonates with me. I'm hopeful specifically that that we are going to be able to emerge from this pandemic at some point during 2021. I don't know when, but it'll happen at some point, I hope. And that will be a good thing. I am hopeful that because of that we are able to rebound in the economy in certain ways, that we are going to experience new ways of doing things, and we're going to start flourishing again in that aspect of our life writ large. I'm hopeful that that people are going to view 2021 as a fresh start, and that we're going to maybe approach and deal with each other with a little bit more dignity and respect, that we're going to find ways to continue to work together to make the world a better place, because that's what it really takes. I think there's much to be hopeful for when we look at the new year. We did an episode last year around this time on New Year's resolutions and stuff, and I like the new year for many reasons. Even though it's somewhat arbitrary, it's like, oh well, it's another date, so I guess I'm gonna start. I'm gonna fix myself. But I think there it is helpful. I think it's a useful psychological mechanism for us to think about trying to do things in a new way. And so I think there are great reasons for hope here.
Yeah. Another piece of my hope is how people do eventually get tired of wallowing and they just get on with it. It's
Hmm.
time to make things better. You see all forms of that kind of stuff, happen. So, there was a piece of subway graffiti that said after the plague, the Renaissance.
Mm,
And I was like, yeah, what's the Renaissance going to look like after this plague?
yeah.
And start to get pumped and motivated, because really, if you don't start looking that way, so hope by itself does nothing. It gives you maybe a dopamine jolt of emotion, right? But that hope needs to release your imagination, then it motivates us to do something like what we're talking about, to get on with it, to take it at bat. So, Ben, let's talk about ways in which we can position ourselves for flourishing this year, because the hope is not enough. It's got to release that mental renaissance.
Yes.
And then we got to do something. You know, you can't have, if Leonardo da Vinci and those guys, man, were they just those incredible brains, and they just thought up the Mona Lisa and the Sistine Chapel, and they're like, man, that would be really cool if somebody did that. And then they just died doing nothing.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I agree. Hope is not a strategy. And I think it's similar to, as we Catholics like to say, faith without good works is dead. So, we got to do something with it. And there are a handful of things that I think, you and I brainstormed around thinking, what can we do to really position ourselves for flourishing in this new year? And, number one is we do need to continue dealing with this pandemic. Okay, a vaccine has been developed. Several vaccines have been developed. People are starting to get them. It's going to still take a while, folks. Like, let's just be realistic. It's still going to take months. This thing has dragged on longer than many people thought it would. And it will take a while for this to still get under control. So you got to keep wearing your mask. You got to keep on socially distancing and taking the precautions you need to. Don't be a jackwagon out there saying that this stuff is not going to help. You need to be sensible with your own precautions. That can help.
Yeah. So are masks 100% effective?
No.
Does that mean they're still helpful?
Yes.
Just like our seatbelts, are they going to keep you 100% from all automobile injuries? No, but you still buckle up for safety, right? So, all right. Another thing you do when the vaccine comes out, get the vaccine.
Right. Don't be an anti-vaxxer, just in general, but especially in with this one, get the vaccine. It has gone through, enough scientific study and rigorous scrutiny that you can take the vaccine. Get it when it's available, when you can, when your number is up to be able to get it. Go ahead and do it. That will help us as a collective to get through this thing. And learn about it so that you can also encourage other people to take it if they're hesitant and don't want to take it. I understand the skepticism that sometimes can occur with various things in our public forum. At the same time, this is one of those things where I think we need to get on board and take the vaccine for our own good and for the good of everyone around us.
So this is a point where self-education really counts. You guys can't just float. I've seen lots of people like, wear a mask. If you don't wear a mask, you're the worst person in the world. Wear a mask, wear a mask. And you ask me, like, well, what about the argument that masks aren't 100% effective? The science says wear a mask. And that's not a conversation. So if somebody says, hey, well, masks don't work 100%. And then you're like, hey, man, you're right. But they actually don't have to be worth wearing.
Yeah.
Do you see the difference in the tone there? You have got to be, if you want to be a leader during this time, if you want to be part of the renaissance that makes 2021 better, you've got to get into the nuance so you can have a non-spiteful conversation with somebody across the aisle. And that means there's two types of arguments, guys. There's a straw man argument. So Ben says, I hate tomatoes. And then I go out into the public forum like, can you believe Ben hates all red fruit? And yes, that's right. Tomatoes are fruits, Americans. But that sets up an argument that looks like his but isn't. It sets up a straw man effigy. And then I beat the fire out of that effigy. Well, that's not fair to Ben. And that's actually what we call intellectual dishonesty. That is being dishonest in the public forum. You, my friend, if you do that, are a liar. All right? Now, the other side of the argument, this is a better. You don't want a straw man argument. You want a steel man argument. So a steel man argument is where you understand the other side's view so well that you can say, hey, so what you're saying is this, right? And they'll be like, man, I wish I could have described it that good myself. Okay, cool. So I understand what you're saying, right? Yeah, absolutely. I feel good about that. All right, let me tell you where the problem is. All right. And so this is this idea, some of these things that I find out when I wade into the other side, because, no, wear a mask. Well, masks aren't 100% effective. Well, you're right. But did you know that they don't have to be 100% effective to work? that has such a different tone than the screaming at each other. And it's laziness, guys.
It is lazy.
Especially if you're the smarter person. You say, "Well, why should I have to go convince all these people?" Well, who else is going to do it? What? Obviously they didn't get it through in K through 12 or what. It doesn't matter. Nature, nurture, it doesn't matter, right? So, but like things you can find, some of the things is point out opposing truths with grace, is how Ben puts it. And I love this. So Bill Gates can't be a virus maker trying to take over the world with the Chinese and a lauded businessman that should be praised by everyone in the US, right? Like, but either he's a diabolical, there are shades of gray in people. Or here's another one. There's no scientific consensus on climate change. So all the scientists don't really believe this that study climate change. Versus there's an organized cabal of scientists that are trying to subvert contrary opinion. Like you can't, both of those can't exist. And lots of time it's just because there's so much coming at us, especially in 2020. Oh my gosh, was there so much that our sense making has been overwhelmed. And if you've done the reading, well, first of all, if you haven't done the reading, get out and do the reading and understand these critical items that are challenging us now. Or if you see a problem in society that you want to own, be an expert on that topic. At least know where the experts are, where the conversation is.
That's right. So I think part of this is really trying to seek some understanding before you condemn some other point of view, right? This is where this goes back to your Steelman idea, all right? The idea that you really want to understand all sides of an issue before you just start to spout off whatever the last thing you heard from your favorite commentator or the latest meme that you saw on Facebook. I get it. We like certainty as humans. That's why all this stuff can really prey on us. We like certainty. We don't like ambiguity. We like black and white. We like this is right, this is wrong, this is what you should do, this is what you should not do. And some things are very easy with that. But when we take that approach towards arguing with each other, it very rarely changes people's minds. Actually, one of the funnier memes I've seen on Facebook was one that said, number of people or times that I've changed my mind because of Facebook. And it's like a little pie graph. It's like, 0. So, we just that doesn't help. If you are, by the way, just a personal thing, if you are going to share stuff on Facebook, make sure that it's like good stuff.
Oh my gosh.
I am sick and tired of seeing people from my past life, from, who I've known for years, who I used to think perhaps were smart and educated and informed, who share stuff that is ill-informed, that is clickbait, that is just pandering to the extremes. That's lazy. It's not helpful, and in fact, it's harmful for our discourse among each other. It's harmful for how we get to some understanding that is helpful for moving us forward. Stop that.
Yeah. This is where leadership is doing the right thing even when it's painful. And so sometimes that well, listen, I just trust the experts on masks. And it's like, yeah, but you found yourself in a community of people that are very mask skeptical. Well, then you just got to do the work and get on the PR train, because it's easy to hate somebody up at the federal government or some guy at the CDC in Atlanta that you don't even know. But it's way harder to hate your neighbor that goes to your bowling league with you. Right. So that's why this requires everyday leaders. And I love that. We need to capture that. This is the renaissance of 2021, and it requires everyday leadership like, well, the people listening to this podcast. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And in addition to being maybe the Renaissance coming after, the Dark Ages here or the plague, one other thing that comes to mind is, what happened after the flu epidemic of 1918? Well, it was the Roaring 20s, and people got dressed up for no reason all the time. And I'm looking forward to that too. So one thing you can do to flourish in this year is, when we can, associate with each other in person and do so in a safe manner. Put on some
time
fun
for
clothes
some swing dancing.
That's right. Enjoy yourselves and flourish with each other there. I just think that's great.
All right. So the other piece, we've got to curate a good public forum.
Yeah.
Right. So that means on social media, saying, I don't know if that sounds right. Maybe you don't say, that's the biggest bunch of hullabaloo I've ever heard. No, it's like, hey, I don't know if that sounds right. Help me understand. Hey, well, you actually didn't do the research there. And you don't attack them. You didn't do the research, you moron.
Right.
And you didn't do the research, and I'm concerned that's not helpful for how we talk because we want to make good decisions as a community, right? Or I've had a couple conversations with some friends that have kids, and I just like, well, I hear you, but if we had to distill this into a lesson for our kids, right? Because we don't even know. Like, did you know when you were growing up that you're going to face a pandemic and
Yeah.
race riots and all kinds of different stuff that's going on and organizational challenge? I would have never thought. And so, my dad says this all the time, who is on a podcast. All this is different than when I was. And he came up through the 60s and the Vietnam War and all that stuff, right? So listen, we can't just say this is what we did on this. We got to develop an operating system for the subsequent generation. So one of those things is like, hey man, how can we distill the way we make decisions for our kids that'll help them face the novel challenges that we can't even guess about?
Right. And another piece of this is to police your own side, which means, we all have political, we all have ideological, other types of sides, quote unquote, with which we have sympathy, that we gravitate towards, positions that we hold, things that we think are true. Now, just because someone who is saying something on your side is spouting off, well, you need to ensure that they're doing it in a gracious and thoughtful way as well, because that's part of this whole intellectual honesty, this pragmatic approach towards dispelling and squashing the dishonesty out there that we really need to have. So take care of your own backyard. If someone on your side of an issue is making an argument in a way that is completely unhelpful, don't just be like, rah, rah, yeah, that's exactly right. Don't pile on, try to curate that in a way that is more helpful for the public discourse.
Yeah. And almost 1,000% of the time, not quite 1,000%, but almost, you cannot take on challenging topics with a meme.
Right.
Memes generate a ha ha ha. It's a schadenfreude, the pleasure at somebody else's unfortune. It triggers that kind of I got you vibe. Memes, they can be funny. Sure, share them on your own side. Do it in closed doors if you need that kind of chuckle. But I'd do some moral internal quests about why do I really need to feel this one-upsmanship with another person? Like what's going on internally that I need that kind of validation? Because in the end, I don't care who's right or wrong. I just want us to quickly exert better thinking processes, better decisions, better conversations so we can move to a better place. Because do I care that they used to think bloodletting was a good solution for disease back in the day? No, because nobody does bloodletting now. And we're not, I can't say we're not using leeches because we can use leeches to put on, cut off fingers and stuff. But, the idea of the baloney of the past doesn't have to dictate our future. So let's not do it. Let's also give people a way to escape. Like sometimes the ego and the pride can be a real speed bump for somebody jumping off an idea that they're like, ooh, I have the wrong idea, but the kind of face. So that means we got to give our politicians out. If they were a flat earther that now thinks the earth is round, we shouldn't be like, but look at you back in 1983.
Flip-flopper.
I flip-flopped on a bunch of things because guess what? I learned I'm a different person than I was when I was in fourth grade or college.
And well, I mean, your sense of humor is still fourth grade for sure, as is mine. But another way to think about this, which I think is productive, is when we are having conversations with people, when we are interacting, solving problems, going about our work and our personal lives here in 2021, one way which we can flourish a little bit more is if we start to really see each other as humans. we start to, see that as the good and the bad. We realize that we are flawed people too. And, treating other people at that level, I think, can be productive. Because, like you said, it is so easy to, attack the, anonymous person, that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention or someone in DC, some politician you don't know. It's a lot harder to, do that in person or, with someone I think if we start to treat everyone as humans, I think we'll have a better way forward.
Right. So I've been working with the public health department in my county, and I call people as helping with the contact tracing program to say, hey, ma'am or sir, have you checked your results for your COVID test? And oh no, we hadn't, and letting people know some of these, hey, you have COVID. And, I hear the range, some of the angst about, I don't want to quarantine or mask or I don't want to get tested has to do with financial anxiety about how they're going to provide for their family because maybe they're a contract worker
Mm.
or they don't have some of these protections that we have. I mean, there's a patchwork here. Leading with empathy is the only way to get to the other side. I mean, if I didn't know how I could put food in my mouth this week for my family, my reaction to a whole host of things would be different because I'm in a stressed state. We have in the military, Ben, we do all the research about people's decision making under acute stress. And it, it's not as good as when you're just sitting in a classroom, right?
No.
What do we call it? The armchair quarterback or whatever, syndrome. We can't armchair quarterback where everybody is and where they're coming from. So you
Right.
gotta lead with empathy. Yeah. So Ben, how are you going to position yourself to flourish this year?
Well, I think, some of the things we've already talked about are certainly things that I'm going to do, but, more specifically, I'll be working to come up with all the different things that I'm going to do in the new year to turn myself into something other than the bag of trash that I am. I'm going to start, I'm going to start eating healthy. No, there are a handful of things that I'm going to try to do. And I think one of them has to do with being even more selective about how I spend my time and my effort, and making sure that the moments that I'm devoting to something are pieces of my life that I wouldn't regret, having spent that time doing. Be it working on worthwhile projects that make the world a little bit better, be it spending time with my family, or some other professional or personal pursuit. I want to ensure that I'm starting to even do a much more rigorous job of eliminating distractions. It's very easy today to be distracted, and part of that is social media, part of that is the 24/7 news cycle, and part of that I like to engage in because I have somewhat of a public persona with this podcast, being a professor, all those types of things. But at the same time, I don't want to get sucked down the rabbit hole of distraction. So eliminating distractions to the best of my ability is certainly part of that. I think you also have a bit of a jolt to your system when you experience tragedies. And I think part of that for me has been, making sure that I am spending my time in good ways. I think we have great things going on here in the podcast. Certainly, we'll be devoting time to that. So, one way I'm positioning myself to flourish is, hey, we're kicking off the new year by getting the podcast back going. And there are other things that I certainly will be doing this year to try to flourish more. But I am looking forward to 2021, and will certainly be doing my best to approach every situation with hope, with possibility, and trying to get the most out of all the opportunities that are out there to make this world better.
Right. So for me, this podcast is my passion. What we're doing here. I've spent the last time in the pandemic, outside of helping our clients and doing all that kind of stuff, engaging in forums on the web that are smaller communities. Maybe they're community based and that kind of thing. Doing the very kind of stuff I'm talking about, where I'm not going in to necessarily criticize people's political ideas. But it's more like helping clean up the public forum. I was like, wait a minute, that wasn't very fair to that other person's argument. Maybe you could try again. These kinds of things. I know I've been in small town Facebook forums that, I get messages from people that said, I never really heard somebody describe why we should wear masks in that way. Now I'm thinking, because of the people I'm around, like, well, wait. But
Right.
this is where you can have such an impact. So if you've got a small town, we talk about the urban rural divide. If you got a small town nearby, or if you live in a small town, get onto those Facebook conversations. And it's not that you have to have some slug out debate, but I mean, so this is what I'm doing. I'm getting out there and teaching through example items like rhetoric and, good debate, methodologies that are fair, building a bigger conversation rather than a smaller conversation. So I want to do that. I want to get our podcast widely, I guess the word syndicated and out there. We continue to grow, which has been incredible. And it's all around this idea of evidence-based thinking. This morning I woke up to this horrible article that was saying Michael Flynn, a former general, is supporting QAnon conspiracies. Now, Ben, we've seen executives that are bad faith. These guys are snakes in the grass scoundrels, and they'll sell ice to an Eskimo type thing. They are just not ethical people at all. And so we want to make a place for people that do want to be ethical, that do want to win the right way, also known as good sportsmanship, right? You shake after the game. You don't just walk off shooting the bird at the other side, right? So the people that want to win, hey, we hear you. We know that there's snakes in the grass out there and you got to navigate. So I want to put tools into people like, here's how you win in a toxic culture. Here's how you win with the snakes in the grass, and create the kind of society that we see both here in the U.S. and even between societies globally. Those are the kinds of things that I'm passionate about. And I got to lose this COVID-19 that I gained.
Outstanding. So those are certainly some great ways in which you are positioning yourself to flourish this next year. And I just want to, as we start to come down the home stretch here of today's episode, just really thank everyone again for sticking with us through the break that we had in November and December of 2020. I certainly appreciate all of the thoughts and the notes and everything that people have reached out to us, in the past 2 months about what happened to me and my family. We're not really sure what our upcoming release cadence is going to look like, but we are going to ease on in as best as we are able. And, we have a handful of great guests that we had to cancel during November, but we're going to bring them back and we're going to do those episodes. We have our own episodes that you and I are going to do, Chris, and I am really looking forward to making the Indigo podcast something that is even more helpful for everyone out there and bring some light, some inspiration, and some evidence-based practices into your lives to help you flourish at work and beyond.
Yeah. So get out there. Let everybody know the boys are back in town. All right. That means get on LinkedIn and you got to share this. That means harassing your coworkers, your spouses. Heck, if your kids aren't listeners yet and you want to raise them correctly, get them on the Indigo podcast.
If you are not a bad parent, make your kids listen to the Indigo podcast. There you go.
We only do this with you. We don't have, we don't get to go on CNN and tell everybody about our podcast. So we need you. And we know how easy it is to socially loaf, to say, I can't wait for an episode of the Indigo podcast. I listen all the time and not do anything. Remember, after the plague, the Renaissance, help us be part of that Renaissance. You guys be everyday leaders out there and lead that Renaissance in your community.
Awesome. So in today's episode, we talked about why there's hope. We talked about how 2020 was tremendously challenging, why we should have hope going into 2021, and some ways in which we can all position ourselves for flourishing in this coming year. Thanks for listening to the Indigo Podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider helping us by rating us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. telling your friends about us, having us on your podcast, or mentioning us on social media. Our website is www.indigopodcast.com, where you can access more information about us and this episode. Thanks again, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.